issue. I'm Luis. I'm going to be taking you for the next, probably most of the series right now. And we're going to be seeing many different topics. And this is one of the ideas of this course. This course is essentially contemporary issues in IP. So it may be a little bit different from the other courses that you guys have on the LLM, where you get something more of a sometimes overview or sometimes a more topical approach, say frameworks and brands, operating digital technologies and so forth. So here we do a more topic-specific approach, but hopefully they can be linked together in different ways. There is a common thread, or at least someone can try to come up with a narrative when it comes to these topics. So far you guys have had all the seminars with Martin, and you probably realize that Martin is very good at empirical research, for example. And you guys will still realize that while I do use empirical research and while I do appreciate empirical research, that's not the kind of research that I do. My approach is a little bit different. And this is one of the good things about this course. You guys get very different ideas and very different methodologies and approaches to law itself and to issues surrounding or involving law. This also makes this course a little bit less black letter than other courses as well. And of course, we get to know European law, UK law, sometimes German law, the way that it is applied. But it's not only about that. We are also concerned about the impact of these laws and how they are being applied in practice as well. I know this seems more like an introduction, but that's kind of like the point because this is the first American meeting to you guys. And just so I can have an idea and see where we're at, actually. So, how many of you guys have practiced IP before coming here? Okay, so 3 or 4. And how many of you have had IP, say, in your home university or in any of the different ways? How many of you are somewhat familiar with IP? And it'd be better, say, 6, 7, okay? About 20% of us. And just polling, so I can see how much time I should spend leveling the playing field here. How many of you are from Europe? Okay, about half. How many of you are from common law systems? Or common law-ish, mixed systems also common? Say UK, Canada, US, Australia. You have a point, really. And so most of you are civil law. Great. So I know I should not assume too much about common law. Good. Nothing wrong with that, but the opposite. You guys will realize that many things which you are used to in civil law systems are not taken the same way when it comes to something to a system such as the UK, for example. And the way that courts actually reason, and the way that judges write judgments actually, can be quite different from somewhere like Germany or France. And this is one of the reasons why you guys actually see, at least on my reading list, a lot of judgments. Because the way that they engage with the audience and the way they write can actually sometimes remind you of a textbook. Because they're giving you an overview of the law, sometimes spending 5 or 10 pages telling you how they reach that particular point, but also being a little bit more upfront, let's put it this way. It's also a bit of a provocation about what they're trying to do there and what does it mean to decide one way or another. So this is a very particular feature of UK judges. They will normally tell you, I could go this way or this other way. I will decide this way because, and this sometimes, and being myself someone who came from a civil law system before arriving in the UK about 6 years ago, he sometimes is not really engaged with. He's sometimes taken as a given. The judge was telling you what the law is, and he or she will apply the law, and there you go. Judgments are 4 or 5 pages long, and that's it. So it's a little bit different in this way already. And I was talking also about my approach to law, and my approach to law is something, I am a bit of a legal realist, let's put it this way. I'm course, I do like the law as it is, the law as it is given the law on paper, but I'm more concerned about how courts are actually applying the law. Not in a very quantitative sense. I'm not really concerned about how many decisions on X there are, or I'm not really concerned about the numbers. I'm more in the qualitative sense. I'm more concerned about how our courts actually engaging with, in reasoning with particular concepts, and why are they doing this? So it's about asking and trying to answer some of these questions, and this is what I will try to show you guys, engage you, try to make you engage with these questions as well. We'll also talk at the end of the seminar about our next seminar, which is on patent law, just to reassure you guys, no need to feel overwhelmed. It's not the point knowing what is the composition of the anything. So there are things about the readings, how to approach the readings when it comes to patent law, especially when a course like this. And also at the end of the seminar, we'll talk about two important things. One is essentially the student presentations. And the other one is the Oxford IP moot, which we are trying to select a team to go and compete, and I will talk about more about this later. Anyone who is interested can actually try to be more involved. With that in mind, let's begin then with our my first at least, seminar, which is international IP law. International treaties, dispute settlement, and arbitration, right? And why, by the way, why we do have a good number of students in this class, which is great. And I got the update numbers, it's actually fewer than I expected. We are 42. That's a big number, which is a good and a bad thing. Bad thing that is that can actually limit us in terms of what we can do when it comes to group activities. But it also means that there are plenty of you to actually engage and participate. So I do expect you guys to participate, to talk, to give your opinion, to give your ideas, and to ask questions as well. So if I'm talking, just raise your hand. I'm happy to be interrupted and to actually ask something. No problem with that. Worst case scenario, I would just say, let me just wrap this up, give me 2 minutes or 5 minutes, and then we'll go back to whatever you're asking. So I'm very open about this issues actually. That also means that in order for this to be really productive, you guys should do your best to do your reading before the seminar. And what I mean by your reading, there's quite a bit of reading here, but there's essentially essential reading and further reading. What I mean before the seminar is essential reading. Try to read as much as you can of this. If you really like the topic, or if you have some spare time for some reason, then obviously you can of course go into further reading, but I don't really expect you to have read this before you come here. Whereas essential reading, yes. Further reading is more, for example, if you want to do your group presentation on something, this is already telling you something more. Or if you want to write your essay on something, or down the line, if you want to write a dissertation on a particular topic, this is already a starting point, essentially. But for example, some of those are US law review articles, which are 120 pages long. So it's not like you are actually expected to read it. But there's a reason why they're there. They're really good articles, especially in patent law. So when we say international IP law, what does that mean, actually, in practice? What does it come to mind, actually? Why is this relevant? What is international IP law? Yes?
International protection of the creative industries of the world, developed worlds, undeveloped world.
International protection. Very good. You already gave me 3 different concepts to work with. It's about international protection, right? Sorry about my letter. I don't know why my handwriting is not great. And then you also mentioned creative industries. Great. Although it depends largely on how you define creative industries, right? It's actually depends. And lastly, developing and developed countries. Very good. So these are essentially, yeah, all this has pretty much a lot to do with international IP law. And what do we mean by international protection? Can someone think of an example here? Think of a product. Yeah.
Maybe if I have a software and I made it in my home state Germany, that the copyright on that software is not only protected in Germany but also in the United States or China.
Very good. So you are actually far more up to date than I was expecting. So yes, software is a very good example because software, it doesn't even need these days a tangible form, right? It doesn't need medium. It can be just downloadable software on the internet. And because of that, physical borders and physical barriers between countries may not matter as much, right? Because it is created in Germany, but once it's put online, someone from Australia, Greece, Portugal, Brazil, China, can pretty much download that, make a copy, sell it if they want to. So one of the questions is, okay, so what are the rights, or what should be the rights vested in the offer of this software, right? And yeah, this pretty much has much to do with international IP law, because otherwise, and this was the very beginning, some would say, of IP law, rights were essentially domestic. France would pass their own copyright law protecting French nationals in France. But what if a book which is written in France is then subsequently sold in Russia or in the US? So one way of addressing this difficulty is actually through international protection, meaning international IP law. International treaties, essentially. So when we think about this, what would be the prime examples of international IP law? What are the main instruments that come to mind when we think about international IP law?
TRIPS.
Someone said TRIPS. Yeah, these days probably the most relevant agreement for different reasons is the TRIPS agreement. Anything else?
Paris Convention.
Paris Convention, very good. So what does the Paris Convention deal with? Very broadly speaking.
Like industrial property, so like patents, trademarks, industrial designs.
Perfect. So industrial property, very commercial-like patents, designs, trademarks. Anything else?
TPP. TPP.
TPP, that's a more recent one. And why are you saying TPP? You're not wrong.
A lot of area, I think, but IP law is an area of.
Yeah, it is a chapter.
Yeah.
And you have a chapter. So, but this is what we call an FTA, right? It's a free trade agreement. And there you have, it's a multilateral agreement as well. You have many countries signing this. And there you have a chapter which is dealing with IP law. So one interesting question for us to be asking ourselves is this the same as the Paris Convention, or is it burned, or is it TRIPS agreement? If not, how so?
Decision 351. Decision 351.
What do you mean by that?
It's a norm from copyright, like my version. Decision 351 is from the Comunending.
Oh, I'm not familiar with the wiki. Fair enough.
But it's international in a way because it reflects a lot of countries.
No, if it is the Indian community, yeah. I just wasn't familiar with that. Apologies. So yeah, we do have multiple agreements which are seeking to achieve many different things. And for example, the first ones, and still probably arguably the most relevant ones that we have are the Paris Convention, industrial property, Berne Convention, copyright, Rome Convention, neighboring rights, .to trips. But we also have a far more specific, sometimes even instrumental agreements, such as the Patent Cooperation Treaty, the Madrid Agreement, Hague, Lisbon, and these are all a WIPO. And they're more concerned with what we call international prosecution, meaning how can you apply for a given right and try to register that given right in as many countries as possible in the most effective way. So say I as a company apply for a patent in the UK. What rights would a patent in the UK give me? Let's say for terfenadine, which is a substance for the treatment of hay fever. Just for the sake of the argument, you don't have to refer to this example.
Exclusivity.
Exclusivity. Yeah, you would give me exclusive monopoly-like rights. Yes. And how far would these go?
Only within.
Perfect. Only within the UK. So if I am a pharmaceutical company selling a medicament based on such a substance, ideally I wouldn't be limiting myself to just the UK market, right? So if I want to be selling these with exclusivity in other countries, I need to get patents in those other countries. So one of these instruments is the Patent Cooperation Treaty. So you file an international patent with WIPO, and then you can more easily use that patent as a source to apply to many different countries. Very specific point, you guys need not to be too much worried about it. Just an example. Madrid works pretty much the same way. An international registration which can later become a bundle of national registration. So you apply for this one and then you select the countries you want to be applying for by using the same application. So essentially, you can pick 50 countries if you want to. Same principle here, and then we have something also more regional in a sense, perhaps more interesting for you, which is the European Patent Convention, which has nothing to do with EU law, by the way, and the Unified Patent Court Agreement, which is to be discussed. And these are ways of increasing cooperation and getting something which they call a European patent. So it's something very much to do with reducing physical borders and also reducing protection costs. So with that in mind, we were talking about our example that one of you gave about the software. But how would is the Paris Convention actually? It's just a wild guess. Yeah.
I think around like 1900.
Even for 1800s, 1883, the 19th century. But yeah, so it's quite old. But the same concerns actually apply here. So let's just take instead of software, for many reasons, champagne. So champagne was always known as champagne for quite a while, at least far more than the Paris Convention came to be at the Paris Convention. So champagne is a specific kind of wine which is produced with a specific kind of grape following a specific method, right? And why is it called champagne? Yeah.
It's made with Maria and France called champagne.
Exactly, it's called so this is one of the very first geographical indications. So it is produced in the area which is known to be or called or named Champagne. So when you go to the supermarket, you hope that when there's something written on the label which is Champagne, that it's going to be from that particular region with some particular characteristics. So you do hope that it will have a specific kind of grape made in a specific kind of way, which will give you some expectations when it relates to the kind of taste that you will have to get from it, right? But if a company in the US, say from Oregon, gets a bunch of grapes which are produced locally and start manufacturing a sparkling wine and putting on the label champagne? Is there any problem with that? And then selling that, let's say for the sake of the argument, not only in the US, but also in Canada, because it's nearby. Yeah.
I would say yes, because a lot of people buy champagne because of that region, that traditional notion, or the brand.
Very good. So they would be getting something and then thinking it's something else. So let's put it this way, right? And they may sometimes be disappointed, sometimes they may not be disappointed. So very good. So this is pretty much the consumer perspective. What about all the producers who are actually in Champagne? What would be their interests, potentially?
They could ask them for a cease and desist, like a letter.
Oh yeah, but you're getting way ahead. We don't even have the Paris Convention yet.
Oh, well, they isn't written yet?
In our example now.
Ah, yeah, okay, no.
So why would France take issue with someone in the US producing a sparkling wine, calling it champagne and selling it within the US and also in Canada? Yeah?
Is it probably harm themselves?
Exactly. So pretty much a very commercial interest in the sense that, well, that's probably going to be meaning that they're going to be selling less real champagne, as I see it being real champagne in the US and in Canada. Well, it's easy if you think UK to Spain, because it's really far and back in the day they would have to actually sail all the way. But at least UK and France say, I would be selling less champagne in the UK. And goes back to our software example from the beginning of class. Essentially, the only way you can do this is through cooperation. Say, you protect mine, I protect yours. So it's essentially a principle of reciprocity. I mean, well, okay, I can accept, me being in the UK, I can accept protecting champagne if you also happen to protect other brands from my cotton brands, or my brandy brands. So I'm not really concerned about geographic indications. I'm more concerned by the brands that we're using which are being actually copied in France. So you protect mine, I protect yours. But of course, doing this through bilateral arrangements takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. Hence, multilateral agreements. So you put a lot of countries in the same room. They all agree on the minimum standards that they wish to protect, and they all come back home. Some would say happily ever after, even though that may not be entirely true. So when we talk about Paris Convention, we have the main principles. We should have the main principles in mind here, right? It is industrial property, so priority rights, meaning essentially that when I apply for a mark in my own country, I am a UK company applying for a mark in the UK. I say I applied for a mark tomorrow. I can keep that date for a given period when I am applying elsewhere. So tomorrow, the 17th of October, that will be my priority date. And I have then a given set of time. And you guys will probably see this in more detail in the other course, for some brands for you who are taking it. And if I apply, say, on January 1st, I can still backdate my application in Germany by referring to 17th of October, which is essentially the priority right. National treatment is pretty much what it says. I am treating foreign nationals the same as I am treating my own nationals. So this is probably one of the most relevant principles here. So I try not to discriminate when it comes to the kind of rights and the access that I'm giving to foreign nationals. Nationals here always. And minimum standards. You need to protect unless this. You can give more, but you cannot give less. And this is the logic the rationale that we see driving most agreements since up until, let's say, France. And when I asked you guys about what legal instruments come to mind when you think about international IP law? The first answer, which is a fair answer, was TRIPS. And why is that? Why is TRIPS so relevant? And what, if anything, makes TRIPS different from the other agreements that we've seen so far? And now we are now in 1994, so that was quite a leap in time as well. Yeah.
I think it's like wide ranging because every country that is in the WTO has to take part in TRIPS.
Very good. So it is what we call a single undertaking. It's not like the TRIPS agreement was an option, or that they have decided to just make a multilateral IP agreement. That actually it was not exactly a chapter, but as if you were a chapter of the WTO agreement, which involves many different things, which involves essentially, at that time it involved tariffs, reducing trade borders, trade barriers between member states and so forth. So the point is that, oh, you want to get into the WTO, you also need to sign this one, by the way, because it's all take it or leave it. That's why we call it a single undertaking. And that's why we still see people complaining about it. And you have very different narratives when it comes to how the TRIPS agreement came to being. Here I would refer you guys to Graham D. Moody's and Rochelle Dreyfus book chapter 1 in further reading, where they essentially broach the very different perspectives when it comes to the origins and the reasons for TRIPS agreement to come to being. And there are many different views. Some say developing countries being forced into getting into these. Others saying that developing countries taking advantage in different areas such as tariffs because they are selling more agricultural products and they could actually negotiate better by signing, on the other hand, by offering to sign TRIPS, and many other different reasons. But it also refers to the tension that you guys identified right at the beginning between developing and developed countries, this narrative about the very different interests that may be driving IP law in different ways. Although nowadays one would say that might not be such as a dichotomy, might be more nuanced than just like developing against developed countries. It's my view. So yes, this is a very important point. So essentially, because it was a trade agreement, not really an IP agreement, you could bring a lot more countries into it for many different reasons. So it was far more wide-ranging than just the Paris Convention as well. But also the clever thing about TRIPS is that it also incorporated the Paris Convention and the Berne Convention in Articles 2 and 9, saying that, oh, by the way, if you're signing this, you also have to comply with provisions X to Y from this agreement and from that agreement. Are any of you guys taking something like international trade law, international economic law, something like that? I'm not surprised. I wasn't expecting, just to be sure. Because what probably makes TRIPS the most distinctive agreement still today is the last point here. The WTO dispute settlement system. What does it mean? Have any of you guys heard of it before? No. The one behind you. You raise your hand. Now it's on you.
Yeah, I think it's an important institution of the WPO. It's also a fundamental basis distribution of why WTO's decision is effective.
Yeah.
It's due to his disputed resolution system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It requires every country for negotiation first and then give a appeal court to judge this case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's allow the countries to implement some powerful punishment to another country who infringement intellectual property law in the treating or amount from service transaction.
Very good. So yes, you're absolutely right. So what is important about and what the dispute settlement system is that actually it is enforcement. There is a enforcement system when it comes to the TRIPS agreement, meaning if you breach it, there may as well be consequences. Which until then, not really. It was mostly a fairly broad international law / diplomatic issue. Essentially, if you don't comply until then, if you hadn't complied with any of the Paris Convention provisions, international law, international relations, countries might not be happy, they might complain, but it's not really that much they can do about it. Whereas here, you do have a dispute settlement system. Essentially, arbitration, you have panels, and those panels will adjudicate to tell whether a member state is in breach or not of a given WTO obligation broadly, but also, as far as we are concerned, a TRIPS obligation as well. And as your colleague mentioned, there are consequences, because if you are in breach, and if you, after you're found to be in breach and you don't comply, you may be open to what we call retaliation. So retaliation means that some of the concessions which are made under the WTO framework can be lifted in relation to this country. To give an example, say, let me use my own country. Brazil is found in breach of a given obligation in TRIPS by a panel. The panel will normally, the dispute settlement body, which is the overseeing body, will normally issue an order to say that, oh, this measure, whatever you have done, must now be made consistent with WTO law, which can be made in many different ways. Essentially would normally require some kind of legislative change. Or if that is not done, you have ensuing proceedings, which may authorize the complaining member state to retaliate. So let's say Brazil, I'm not complying a measure, a provision dealing with patent law. So the first thing that they can do, say the US was complaining, first thing that the US can do is lift concessions, meaning national treatment, which was that principle, that no longer applies to you, mate. So I am no longer required to treat you the same as my nationals or as any other national when it comes to IP protection in the US. So that can be quite serious if you think about it. So meaning, I don't have to enforce or to give you any trademark registrations or any patents in my country. So good luck with that. So this is retaliation in the same field. If that doesn't work, there's more. Because then member states are allowed to do what we call cross-retaliation, meaning you can retaliate in other areas. I know it may not mean that too much if you're reading the newspapers today, because no one seems to care about WTO that much anymore, especially in the US. But the point is, at that time, and I think we're talking about 1994 here, that would mean that, okay, you don't have that many rights being protected in the US, so I'm going to retaliate in a different sector, which means that all the cotton you're actually shipping and selling in my country, I'm going to overtax it by 200%. So you're choosing a different area entirely and retaliating. And obviously, do you guys think that the cotton producers in Brazil will be happy if their products are being taxed by over 200% because of some IP issue? No. So the idea is essentially you have national domestic lobbying groups putting a lot of pressure on governments to actually comply with the WTO law. So this retaliation, it's not compensation, it's retaliation. These measures can be lifted. So, important thing here, no compensation. So there is no damages award. It's not about whatever you have done in the past. However wrong that may be, a state which wins in a dispute is not going to get any kind of damages. It's only about what we call prospective remedies, meaning you need to change your law or you need to conform to WTO law in some specific manner, otherwise we're going to retaliate. But the interesting point as well is that, and this is the other side of TRIPS, is that it actually cuts both ways. Because in the same way that, say, the US could use cross-retaliation to pick a specific sector and retaliate to make other countries comply with TRIPS provisions, soon enough other countries realized that it could retaliate the US for not complying with other things which have nothing to do with IP by using IP rights. So this is a very famous case, US cotton, which involves Brazil and the US. It has something to do with tariffs, nothing to do with TRIPS. But not only the US was found in breach, but they never really complied for many years until the WTO authorized cross-retaliation, and cross-retaliation being under TRIPS. So Brazil essentially said, well, if you don't actually comply now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to lift all concessions under the TRIPS agreement, saying that all the patents and all the trademarks that your nationals have in Brazil are not going to be granted or enforced. They're going to be suspended. And they complied. So this is the other side of the TRIPS agreement as well. It gave leverage in different ways to some developing countries. Not all of them, but at least those having a very significant market to developed countries, they gain leverage that people not necessarily anticipate. Okay, so far? Yeah, we can just go with this. Also to keep in mind, because TRIPS incorporated the Paris Convention and Berne Convention, or at least parts of it, it also means now that depending on which provision you're breaching of the Paris Convention or the Berne Convention, that is now also subject to dispute settlement at WTO. So it also gave more effectiveness or a enforcement effect to these older agreements as well. Now, this is also what makes what we call WTO law and WTO jurisprudence all the more relevant, because, and this is when it starts becoming actually more interesting, because we're talking about TRIPS on paper and how the TRIPS was conceived and how members are supposed to implement it, right? But on the other hand, you have a body of case law being developed saying how TRIPS actually should be read and what member states have done or have not done, which was or was not accepted as being consistent with WTO law. So this is more law being applied in practice, isn't it? And these are the cases that you guys have in your reading list for this way. Although some of them are actually further reading. So what I would like you to think about is actually the potential impact of decision making at this level and how they may or may not reflect on national autonomy. So can member states really legislate freely and decide and make their own IP policy or even other kinds of policy which may or may not affect IP? When we have something which is subject to adjudication at the WTO level. So one very good illustration is Canada pharmaceutical patents, for example. Has anyone had a chance to read this one? And would like to tell us what it is about? And again, I would really not like this to become a lecture where I am the only one talking. Please help me. So patents, right? Some of you told us already, patents gives us exclusive rights, very monopoly-like in a given jurisdiction, right? Canada, patents in Canada. Canada came up with 2 exceptions in their patent law. Exceptions meaning exclusive rights would not extend to these particular 2 situations. You cannot enforce your patents against someone doing these 2 things. One was regulatory review exception, and the other one was the stockpiling exception. To give you guys some context, try to think about what it means to the country and how it may or may not affect their policy and why Canada was petitioning trying to do this, right? So what we're talking here, and everyone knew that, was essentially pharmaceutical patents, as the name says. The case says. So drugs, substances with therapeutic effects. Say cancer fighting drugs. The problem with any kind of pharmaceutical substance is that how long do you guys think that it takes for a company to actually start selling a given drug? Ballpark, take a guess. Yeah.
8 to 10 years.
That's a fair assumption, 10 years, because a lot of research and development, and then you do clinical trials, and then you also need to seek regulatory approval. So, FDA in the US, FDA actually, sorry, FDA in the US, or pretty much any country has their own agency which is dealing with the approval of pharmaceutical drugs. They look into whatever you're proposing, they look at the trials were done, and they try to make a risk assessment to see whether this is actually effective and whether this is actually safe enough to be sold on the market. And that thing also takes kind of a lot of years, 5, sometimes 6 years depending. So the point is, regulatory review exception is essentially because, and here's another question, what happens after a patent expires? So we have monopoly rights, and those last 20 years. What happens after 20 years? Yeah?
It's open for use, like everyone can use it.
Yeah, it's open for anyone else to exploit or work the patent, as we like to say. So the idea of patents, and this is something that we will talk more about next week. I give patents for a reason, and this reason is essentially as an incentive, so you would actually carry out research and development. So after a given time, everyone else is free to use your invention. So what does that mean for the pharmaceutical industry in practice?
I think that means that they have to hurry up bringing out their products because, like, after a certain amount of time, their patents go away, and then they leave.
Fair enough. From this perspective, that might make the patent holder more competitive to the extent that they need to keep searching for new substances and different kind of products to launch, so they would still retain some kind of patent rights over those new products. And that has much to do with our next seminar, actually. So yeah, that was spot on. But I was meaning from the other perspective, the perspective of those competing with the company which until so far had a patent. After that patent expires, anyone else is free to use it, right? Generics. So that's the whole reason of generics, essentially. After the patent expires, everyone can use the information from the patent, because the patent is actually teaching someone how to make the invention. Everyone can use that and start producing the same products. So this is the patent side. However, you still need to seek and obtain regulatory approval. So they need to find, just to know, for example, if your product is equivalent to, or is similar enough to the product which was being sold until that point by the patent holder. And again, that may take time. Not as much as the first approval that the patent holder gets, which is roughly 5, 6 years. This one might probably still at least a couple of years to get this kind of approval as well. So the regulatory review exception essentially said that if you are a competitor and if you are actually allowed to use the invention while it is still being protected by the patent, to do anything, to take any steps necessary for you to obtain regulatory approval. So essentially to try to gain time. You cannot obviously cannot sell the product because that's to protect it, but you can actually use that within your own company for the purposes of obtaining approval once the patent expires. So you actually gain time. You can do that, say 2 years before the patent's due to expire. You can start doing things that otherwise you would only begin to do after the patent expires. Stockpiling exception, pretty much the same thing, same rationale, but it was essentially, even before the patent expires, you, as a generics manufacturer, you are allowed to start producing and stockpiling, hence the name, generic products. So on day one after the patent expires, you can actually flood the market with as many products as you want, or as you can. So the idea of these two exceptions is essentially that on the first day after the patent expires, after those 20 years, other companies would be in a position to actually already enter into the market, whereas otherwise you would have a lapse of a few years until actually other companies would start selling those competing products. So that seems quite relevant, doesn't it? Would anyone like to take a guess as to what happened? You have two exceptions. And you have a 50% chance on each one to say whether it was found to be compliant or not compliant with the WTO law. So, regulatory review. Was found to be compliant with WTO law, so it was okay for a country to have an exception saying that you can use the invention for the purposes of seeking approval from the regulatory body that you have in your country. Stockpiling exception, however, was not. But it cannot really start producing, in practice, the product before the patent expires. And again, it's not saying that you can start selling, it's just say that you can start producing and stockpiling, that's the name. So you start building stock. And the WTO panel said, well, no, that's not consistent with. So let's think in terms of international law. International law, we have the TRIPS provisions, right? And now this may be challenging when I'm actually looking for the volume. So this is the key provision that was being discussed, right? I'm not very good for this, sorry about that. I'm going to post these slides later because they're just for reference, really. So this is the key provision, essentially. It's probably too small for all back there, isn't it?
No, it's fine.
That's on the trip, right?
Yeah, Article 30. Oh yeah, you guys can open Article 30 of TRIPS. That will work as well. Members may provide limited exceptions to the exclusive rights conferred by a patent, provided that such exceptions do not unreasonably conflict with normal exploitation of the patent and so forth. I think when it comes to applying law and decision making, guiding policy, yeah, it's a great provision, isn't it? But it doesn't tell you much, does it? As a country, if your only baseline, your only reference is this provision, you would think, well, I can do many things as long as it fits common sense. It's fairly broad. It is a very loose standard with some terms, essentially. Limited exceptions. What does that mean? Yeah, it is an exception which is limited. And you guys may laugh when I say it, but this is pretty much what this panel says. a limited exception is an exception which is limited. To the exclusive rights, meaning I am allowed to make some kind of limitations, provided that as long as they don't conflict with the normal exploitation of the patent. But again, unreasonably, that's another adjective there. So what does that mean? With a normal exploitation, what the hell does a normal exploitation of the patent mean? And again, do not unreasonably prejudice the legitimate interests of the patent owner. They take into account, of the also the interests of the parties. So there's a lot going on there, isn't there? And the point is essentially, this is the relevance, and this is what I mean by law after it is actually being educated and applied in practice, is that the WTO panels, the dispute settlement system, in the end, is the one which is going to be telling us what all those things mean. But of course, when they do that, they're making choices, aren't they? Because you can say that the normal exploitation of the patent is one thing, but you could potentially say that it is also another thing, right? I mean, your words. They're not even judges, they're arbitrators. And this is the key part from Canada pharmaceutical patents, and what they said that the normal practices of exploitation of a patent would consist of. Now it's probably too small. But essentially, the normal practice of exploitation would comprise the right to exclude all forms of competition that could detract significantly from the economic returns anticipated upon a patent's grant of market exclusivity. And here's some reference to the patent policy. Patent laws establish a carefully defined period of market exclusivity as an inducement to innovation. And the policy of those laws cannot be achieved unless patent owners are permitted to take effective advantage of that inducement once it has been defined. So it was an economic rationale saying about all the economic returns that are expected from the patent by the patent owner, essentially. So what he decided, different slide. Remember, we have the two exceptions, right? Regulatory review and stockpiling. And the argument from Canada was essentially that normal exploitation would comprise anything which would fit within this particular 20-year term of protection. You cannot really expect to have anything more than that as being your expected exploitation of a patent. And here is the twist of the argument, and they were also arguing that, however, if I don't have these two exceptions, remember how we were talking about the time lapse? The patent owner would actually have a de facto, meaning it's not derived from the law, but it's, as a matter of fact, they would have a de facto exclusivity of at least some 2 years or more, because everyone competing with them or willing to compete with them would first have to obtain regulatory approval, which takes time, and would start to also produce and stockpile the products before selling them. So Canada's argument, which some of you may think, well, that's fair enough, would say that, well, that we should take measures, we should do things to actually allow competitors to be able to enter into the market the day after the patent expires. So this de facto exclusivity should not be understood as some kind of normal exploitation of the patent. And again, the panel, after saying all this, essentially said that, well, you're right in saying that the regulatory review exception actually addresses this particular problem, and we find that the length or the period of exclusivity that would derive from another companies having to seek approval after the patent expires will not be covered by the normal exploitation of a patent. However, stockpiling is. So they actually went halfway with the regulatory review exception being consistent, in the end you stockpiling being inconsistent. So in practice, the panel said that, sorry, the normal exploitation of a patent would extend also to a de facto exclusivity period involving how much time competing companies would take to actually start producing and stockpiling. So as you see, there's actually a lot of power in this kind of decision making today. Because you have a panel, and the panel is actually ad hoc. These are nominated, appointed arbitrators who are chosen to adjudicate this issue, which can go either way. Because someone would say, it would also be common sense to say that, well, side with Canada and say, yeah, it's fair enough that you can start stockpiling the product to start selling the day after. So this is one of the aspects that I want you guys to have in mind when it comes to this kind of decision making. And that there is more to the international agreements, especially to TRIPS, when it comes to what do the provisions mean, how are they being read and applied in practice, and what is the potential impact on decision making and even regulatory autonomy of member states. Let's say, after this one, do you feel that other countries would be encouraged to do something like this stockpiling exception? Not really, right? So even though it's not a common law system, even though the decisions are not really binding upon other panels, other panel could potentially decide in a different way. These disputes don't happen so often. They can only be brought by states, meaning you don't have companies or individuals being the claimants. It's only one state against another. So in practice, it becomes binding to the extent that most member states will be relying on these decisions when setting your own policy and when deciding, or at least when assessing the risk that they may be facing a complaint from another member state by doing something. Any questions so far? Oh, by the way, I've posted already the main slides on Moodle. Whenever I have the main slides, I will post. We're meeting on always Wednesday, so hopefully by the weekend before, I'll be posting all the slides that I could be using as main slides. So if you guys want to open these on your laptop, you can actually do this just by accessing Moodle. So now let's go to the more controversial / interactive part of this. Actually, let's take a break there because it's time. Let's say 5 to 10 minutes break, and then we are going to discuss tobacco flavored packaging. Read it to me. This is what we call plain packaging now. Would anyone like to have a try and tell us what this case is about? No fear of getting it wrong. It's actually 900 pages long, so it's quite painful to read. And I'm not saying that you should read it. You probably shouldn't. Especially because of the way it is written, it's quite painful. But although this is the most relevant case dealing with grip, it's not the most relevant W2 case for the past few years. So what does it mean, plain packaging? So now you guys need to talk. Yes, you and back.
Yeah, since I'm a smoker.
Very good. No judgment, actually. Very good, because you can share your experience.
No, it's just, I mean, it's
this. Oh, you have one. Great, yeah.
Here as well. So the thing is, I think they introduced that so people would buy less cigarettes because of the appearance of the package. For example, I mean, I don't know if you like JPS or Pall Mall or whatever. I mean, they all have different colors, different different shapes on the packages. which is like their trademark actually.
Mhm.
So now it's all plain, and they did that so people would buy less cigarettes, which is I think not really.
Okay, you're skeptical, which is fair enough. So, very good. And which country was this?
Excuse me?
In which country was this initially?
In which country I'm from?
No, which country did Tim plain Chinese for the first time?
I think France. Was it? Oh, Australia.
So the country doing this was Australia. But very good. We have like it is far more common these days, and very important. So this is different from what we were discussing relating to Canada and pharmaceutical patents. Now we're talking about trademarks and branding. Essentially, it's all about branding, which we will come to discuss in one of our seminars. Is saying, so what are branding for? Brands for, and what is the potential impacts that brands have, if they do have, on consumers? So, do visual cues, visual styles, and branding make you buy more products, or make you start doing something that you otherwise wouldn't? So this is the whole theory and the whole aspect of it. So the idea of Australia was saying that, oh, let me make a packaging which is going to be pretty much standard across all the different brands, and it is going to look as ugly as it can possibly be. So this greenish, goldish color, history says that essentially it is the studies would suggest this is the most unappealing color someone could actually pick. So this is how they chose it. And they were taking branding and says, okay, that's what is the least appealing color that I can take, and let's just now make a very standard, unappealing lettering with obviously those features that we are all used to. And yes, some of you may be skeptical, but their point was essentially saying that we think that those who are already consuming these products are essentially lost hope. It's very difficult to actually make them stop, and this is unlikely to have an effect. However, for those who haven't tried it yet, we think that you might make it less of a Hollywood movie, less appealing, if we just make it plain ugly this way, so youngsters will be less likely to try it, or will feel, sometimes peer pressure, will feel less, it will be less appealing for someone like in a young age to actually start doing it, because they are known to be highly addictive. So, do we think that brand owners like this? Yes?
No, because it makes the brand, I would say, ugly, and kind of like puts a bad name on the brand, like the brand killed.
Okay, puts a bad name on the brand. Fair enough. So let's say there may be spillover effects to the extent that the effects that we know should be associated with branding, that meaning a brand has an image and it has attributes that are actually conveyed to consumers. And there are a lot of branding actually strives to do this. There's a lot of choice involved in picking the colors and picking the logos and signs and whatever they're supposed to convey to consumers. To sometimes create specific feelings when it comes to buying or even consuming a product. This would go in the other direction, so there would be some kind of spillover saying that, well, no, people will associate my brand, which was supposed to be cool, with something which is plain ugly and means essentially death. But yeah, that is a very good argument. So any other arguments?
That they couldn't, like, when you protect the trademark, you need to use it as you protected it. And if I protected like the trademark with that type of letters, I wouldn't be able, I would have to use it exactly the same way as in the other package, and in the other package is not distinctive, so I couldn't protect it.
So maintaining registration, you're completely right in saying that, well, when you register a mark in a particular way, let's say if the mark were this label, you would have to use it in this way or with very insignificant alterations in order to keep your registration. And then as long as you do that, registrations can be pretty much perpetual. We can keep renewing them, and you can have them for, unlike patents, which are supposed to last 20 years, registrations can last 500 years if you comply with the conditions. So one of the arguments was essentially, yeah.
this is actually an argument against the plain packaging. I think it takes the companies the opportunity to compete with each other.
Interesting. I like this argument because you can cut both ways.
I mean, because cigarettes in general, if somebody doesn't smoke a lot, they won't notice the difference. But
so let's just explore this one. You're absolutely right. So in theory, you would limit competition within this particular sector because all would look the same, which is another way of saying that they are distinguishing themselves by branding, not necessarily by product quality or taste or something like that, right? Because what we're doing here is that we're essentially stripping them of all the distinctive elements that they would otherwise have. But can we not say that, yeah, but it's still a level playing field because we're putting all the manufacturers in the same position. And you guys are all getting plain packaging. It's not like I'm picking one and another. So you guys can still compete between yourselves. It's not Australia as well, so it's not really my fault if your product is actually the same. You have just like mineral water, have just competing by just using your brain. Anything else? No need to be afraid of getting it wrong. You guys can be creative or just brainstorming here. Nothing? Okay, so let's hold this. Now let's think about the other side. If you were defending Australia, what are the potential arguments for plain packaging? That was essentially your only argument. Public health. So public health, was it Australia the only one making this argument? So you're Australia, you pass legislation, then you find yourself litigating at WTO. Then, as a lawyer, you would think, oh, I need help. So who would be on my side, potentially? So who could potentially be submitting, say, amicus curiae, filing amicus curiae submissions and that kind of thing? Health. It probably has health in the name.
The World Health Organization?
So here you have World Health Organization of doctors, health professionals. And there is a multilateral agreement at the WHO which was encouraging restrictive measures on tobacco products. So here, which one of these you guys think would be IP? One, the other, or both? And how so? So this is being litigated under TRIPS, right? So it is IP, obviously, the first one. We're talking about trademarks and brands. Restriction imposed on trademarks and brands. Also trademarks. Public health. How does that fit within the TRIPS agreement framework then? Yep.
Maybe as like some exception, or like some countermeasure. Yes.
Very good. Exceptions and countermeasures. So legitimate interests, when we see this language, doesn't have to be right, as a right. It can be something else. It can be a policy concern or a policy objective. So most of the litigation turn on the following provisions here. So Article 15, protectable subject matter. The nature of the goods or services to which a trademark is to be applied shall in no case form an obstacle to registration of the trademark. So this is kind of a discrimination clause. You're saying, okay, you guys are treating tobacco products different from the others. And you guys are not allowing me to register this mark because you're limiting the way that I can use it, actually. The nature of the rights. This is possibly one of the most relevant ones, not necessarily to this case because it was not the best case for the tobacco company, for the states complaining, but the one which is more likely to have repercussions in other cases, which is telling us what is a trademark and the nature of a trademark. What does it have to have? What does it mean to have a trademark right? And here we have the panel saying that, well, it is a right to exclude, it is not a right to use. Which leads us to another argument that we didn't put here, which would be trademarks as property. Because, and civil lawyers know this better than anyone else. What does it mean to have the property in something? You can do whatever the hell you want. Right?
Yeah, the absolute right.
Yeah. So what does this absolute right include?
That no one can use your product or exploit it in any way without your permission.
Mm-hmm.
You can ask for compensation if something, if someone explodes or harms your product. You can use it as you want.
Yeah. So that's the main difference, because the first one is the right to exclude. The second one is the right to seek relief, meaning someone is in my property and I can actually get a court order to remove this person from my property. But the most relevant here, which, and you don't see the language of property being really used explicitly, but it is essentially trying to characterize trademarks as property to the extent that if it is a property, for one, I can do whatever the hell I want with it. I have the right to reuse. Can I burn my own house? Oh yeah, technically. Not necessarily because you may breach many different other kinds of laws, obviously, and you should. But as far as the property right is concerned, yeah.
I want to say that actually Australia's argument for the plain packaging is they use the gap in the wording of Article 16, I guess, because yeah, they're not using, like they're a third party, but they're not using the same. They're doing something completely different. But the moment they do all the same, for example, like the plain packaging, all green, they actually take them the right to compete. And the right, for example, if everything would be like that, we don't need trademarks, we don't need anything. If everything would be the same.
I agree.
So actually they take it, like, that's what I'm trying to say. They took the gap in the wording because it says they have the exclusive right to prevent the third parties from using the same content, but what if they prevent them from using the trademark at all?
No, yes, and you're right. But many of the arguments that Australia was putting forward, actually the panel didn't accept, even though they also didn't accept the arguments that the complainant states were making. And you're right, they were being far more liberal in the interpretation of the provisions that they had with them. For example, the one on discrimination, they were saying that, well, I'm not discrimination because I'm treating all the same, and the other party was actually saying that discrimination should be, and they were saying discrimination should be limited to picking out one only and not all the others. So yeah, there are many things turning on this, and that's probably why it's 900 pages long. But also, yeah.
I actually have another argument for the health, like against the health argument,
Sure.
which is like very individual. I don't know if it's going to fit, but so.
You're healthy.
No, it's not about that. I'm definitely not healthy. The thing is, so the tobacco is all plain. The plain packaging is there to make people, like, prevent people from buying cigarettes.
Mhm.
So people who are really addicted, they will buy cigarettes anyways.
Mhm.
Let's say like that. In Germany, I'm smoking Camel. First, I like the packaging, it's yellow, and I like the taste of it. So since I'm here, first, they don't have Camel over here, and second, every time I go to like news shop, I buy whatever they have, because first of all, there is no packaging which tells me this is my brand I'm always smoking, and secondly, they don't always have everything, and this is actually something against health, because it's really bad to smoke different types of brands all the time. It's better to smoke one brand. Like, seriously, it is.
Is there evidence on this?
It's really bad to smoke like different brands, because all have different I don't know, like the chemical
Concentrations of
exactly.
whatever.
It's really not good. So
That's a
actually
fair
the
point.
brand or the appearance or the name.
There's interesting things here. So one would argue that you can the way that you buy tobacco products these days, you have to call them by name anyways, because usually they're behind the counter. You're never really reaching for them. So does it really make a difference if you can you're always going to say anyways, give me a Camel?
Sometimes
Or
you
give me a
forget the name
Marlboro.
when you see the yellow packaging.
If you're
That's
smoking,
it.
you probably or at least consumers adapt. Then you need to remember the name, just write a note on your smartphone. And this is one of the arguments. But the other argument, which was actually made by the complaining states, was that, and this is no joke, was that we're not in the business of attracting new customers. We're actually competing for the ones that we already have. So the point is, all that we do with the packaging, all the colors, all the branding, they're not really to attract new people into smoking, people who have never smoked before, just so we can compete better between ourselves, which is a variation of the argument that you just made. I have a very dark, sinister counter-argument to this, which I should not say. Let me just say that if that was actually true, then we wouldn't have to do much, because in 40 years, it wouldn't be a problem anymore. But the point is that argument didn't work as well, essentially. But this is also telling that, for example, if there is no right to use, there are many implications arising out from this. And again, we see it only provides it for a negative right. And there is no right to use. It's only limited to your right to prevent certain activities by unauthorized third parties. And also very, very interesting, the trademark owner's commercial interest in a market situation is not a right. It may be a legitimate interest, but it is not a right. This is pretty much a big part of the argument, isn't it? Because you're essentially, and this is pretty much true, you're drastically altering market conditions. Because you're now intervening, you're regulating this market more heavily in a way that all the expectations that we had until then have been drastically changed. So what gives? Can you do that? And here we have a panel saying, well, this might as well be a legitimate expectation, meaning it may be factored into the assessment in some way, but it's not like you have a right to market conditions as they stand. Because what could potentially happen otherwise if a panel said, well, yes, there is a right to market conditions as they stand from the perspective of the legislating member state? That would drastically reduce their autonomy, right? Because anything that now you do that could potentially change the market conditions would be potentially affecting his right. So it would be much easier for that to be infringing or in breach. Now the key provision, the one which was heavily litigated in the better case for those complaining, was essentially Article 20. the use of a trademark in the course of trade shall not be unjustifiably encumbered by special requirements, such as use with another trademark, use in a special form, or use in a manner detrimental to its ability to distinguish goods and services, and yada, yada, yada. So this was actually the most difficult case, and I've put on your reading list. It's not really an article to the extent that it's not really that long. It's more like a commentary by Tanya Voon, where she just examines and summarizes in a very helpful way the panel's approach to this particular article. And, but in the end, it all turned on whether it was justified or not. So the key provision in the entire 900 pages judgment is essentially this one. Was it justified or not? And here we have Australia saying, this is my justification, public health. And to be fair, empirical studies at that time already, and even more now, do suggest that there is a reduction in the consumption of these products. It's not in the consumption, at least in the number of new consumers actually being driven into these products. So very quickly, so you guys can think about is this. Yeah, I think that we may all probably agree, or most of us would probably agree that, well, you can find some justification, or it can be fine with plain packaging of tobacco products, but then, what about this one? Obesity is the new smoking. Expanding to the food and drink sectors, and then we have something like this. So that comes to the point that one of you made a few minutes ago, which was, so then we may find ourselves in a world with no brands whatsoever, where all products in all sectors look exactly the same. So is that a bad thing? For one. Why? Yes?
I think it's a very bad thing because then we all don't have to study. I mean, this is like...
Then we just can go home, yes,
yeah,
that's a fair point.
It just doesn't make sense because then we don't need trademarks, we don't need anything because everything would be the same.
Mm-hmm.
Companies will not have the opportunity to compete or to be on another range than other companies. Like, it's not fair. I guess it's not fair competition.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I just don't see how it can make sense from a health point of view, like the health argument not working with it, because I think we all agree that, sorry for one who smokes, but like one cigarette is not good for you. Whereas I know people who have diabetes where sometimes if you have like trouble with your health, a square of chocolate can actually be good. Like it's not bad if you use a small amount of sugar. So basically I don't see how an health argument would work in this case. The problem with obesity is the way people can like consume the products. So I think it's about education and maybe something could be done about advertising, but I don't think it could be really regulated the same way.
Very good. So you're addressing the justification point. In Australia got away with it because it was justified. It doesn't have to be unanimous to be justified, but at least it had strong support by not only opinion by stakeholders, but also people advocates, to some extent it says. So less convincing and better ways to do it maybe, so they have alternatives point, which I like, because then it becomes pretty much like a proportionality test, doesn't it? So you have, is it justified? Yes, no. Do we have alternatives? Do they actually achieve the aims in an equivalent where at least somewhat closely to whatever we're trying to achieve? And yes, there is also the argument that life would probably be plain boring without trademarks. Something like this. So what could be the arguments for this kind of extension? Why would we want to adopt plain packaging, and this is what people have been talking about. Sugar drinks, alcohol, chocolates, sweets. Yes.
Maybe because some of these products are like packaged really like appealing, and maybe like a lot of people don't see like the danger behind it.
Okay, good point. So, and
That pretty much sums up that human beings are kind of dumb, and we just we just rely a lot of packaging, like
very good. So we may have
nobody really reads the ingredients, just like the front.
we may have different things happening here as well. So different, this discussion can become a broader discussion, and sometimes a passionate discussion between. I'm not saying you're wrong, actually. I'm also quite a liberal myself. But between what people call a nanny state, a liberal state, freedom of choice. So these are things that could be potentially factored into this discussion, moving away from the IP point only to say, well, yeah, but are we not then making too many choices for consumers? Should we not allow them to make these choices? And I find it appealing, but however, there are two things here. One, who is making these choices? It's the state legislating, isn't it? And how usually a state legislates?
In favor of big companies.
That's a very cynical argument, but yeah, fair enough. But I was thinking, how does a piece of legislation comes to being usually? Through parliament, hopefully? Or something similar, right? With elected representatives. Someone would say, well, yeah, but if this is a policy choice which is being taken by the state, by elected members, and if you as an individual don't like it, vote for someone else. This is one of the arguments, essentially, because we're talking here about things which are not allowed, not necessarily things that you must do. So Australia plain packaging tells us that it's okay to do plain packaging. It doesn't tell us that every member state should do plain packaging, which would take another agreement, multilateral agreement to do this kind of thing. Someone of you was trying to say something. However, there's also the other side of the coin as well, isn't there? Because sweets, so who's likely to consume sweets? All of us. But also? Children, yes, that's one point. However, if we compare this to tobacco, are sweets addictive? Or as addictive? Controversial point, essentially.
It's difficult to say. I mean, I think you have to do a survey to.
Empirical evidence, very good. So there's an argument to be made that we need to have more empirical evidence. So one could try to fit this within the WTO framework, saying that in order to be justified, show me evidence that it is addictive. That is one approach. And then I may actually be more inclined to accept whatever you're trying to do. Well, let's say it is as addictive as tobacco. I think that's a safe one to say. Probably not, right? Hopefully not. Well, at least I'm not eating chocolate every day. Or at least not 5 or 6 bars of chocolate every day, depending. So this is more so you guys can keep in mind, what are the potential implications when we talk about a case, especially at the WTO? It's not always necessarily just one case. It may also lead to something else. Because if member states use something like as a plain packaging decision as their guidance, because there's not much guidance otherwise, then they direct us in different ways. So this is something that you guys also find on the slides. I know it's too small. That's why I did this. So this is the other side, and this is a study from Brent Finance. So not necessarily unbiased, but still, it's data. They looked into these particular industries, which are the targets, the potential targets: alcohol, confectionery, savory snacks, and sugary drinks. The main companies in those markets. some of your conclusions are thus. This would be the potential impact of plain packaging, essentially. 234 billion of enterprise value stands to be lost if plain packaging legislation was implemented for these 8 companies. Beverage industry, about 430 billion of impact. So what do we see here? And this is leading to my last point today, before we start talking about housekeeping and other stuff. What, from the perspective of trademark owners and from the perspective of trademark law, what does it mean to have a trademark? In a very cynical way.
Money.
It is worth quite a lot of money, and we tend to forget this as well. So looking from the other perspective, it is money, and the decisions that we make affect commercial interests and also may cause losses. So let's say an impact of 430 billion on the entire beverage industry. So what could be the potential effects of this? Yeah.
Either some companies shut down and unemployment rates rise.
Very good. Exactly. So companies may have to shut down. When they shut down, they obviously will have to dismiss people. You may rate other problems that the law of unintended consequences. You may start creating problems or having effects that you did not necessarily anticipate. Yes.
Graphic designer.
Yeah, advertising as an industry itself. Back in the day when advertising was allowed, the main clients of many advertising companies, and if you guys watch Mad Men, you would know this, tobacco industry. I mean, you're still creating jobs. Sorry. Yeah.
Just a question about that survey. Does it say that general consumption rates go down as well, or is it just the loss of the 8 biggest companies?
I mean, the methodology is not the most scientific. This is more like a policy/advocacy paper, but it gives us an insight into how much trademarks are worth. That's how we take it. But I think they are also, I put the link for the report and you can have a look, but I have the feeling that their methodology, when it comes to causation, it's not great. But given from what we've seen in plain packaging, it's reasonable to assume that there is also some reduction in consumption. But they're also taking how much the values, if you take those reports saying how much is a brand worth. They're pretty much taking that and compiling that. So the methodology itself is quite dubious. And I wouldn't take this as saying like, oh, these are the exact numbers and these are the exact impacts. It's more to illustrate and say there is an actual impact, which may lead to consequences. So when we think about this kind of policy, you need also to try to measure the potential impact from different perspectives as well. Because while everyone, it's hard to say no to an argument of public health. That is the point, isn't it? Obviously, we all want everyone to be healthy, to live as long as they can, possibly. But there's also the other side. And just an illustration of some empirical studies showing that there is also already some effects from plain packaging. But also leads us to my last point today, which we don't have the time to get much in depth, but we may continue at the beginning of our next seminar. But essentially, if they are worth money, they are investment, aren't they? Companies invest in trademarks. So if I am Coca-Cola, and I am in Australia, and I've been there for decades, and I've been doing advertising every single year, and I have a consumer base which is of don't know how many million consumers, I made quite an investment. So this is going again to this argument in a different way. They are worth value, they're worth money, and in a way they can be equated with property. And this is the new thing now, where we see this regime shift. Because some have been less successful than others at the WTO. They're now moving to investment agreements and arbitration under bilateral and other kind of investment agreements. So instead of, not necessarily instead of, or also in addition to litigating at the WTO, I might as well, and here is one of the differences, as a company with assets and which has invested in a particular country which is covered by these agreements, I myself as a company, doesn't have to be the state, I can bring a claim against the state which legislated. That's why in plain packaging you see two cases, one against Australia, brought by this, which is quite dubious, brought by this Hong Kong subsidiary of Philip Morris under a bilateral agreement, and another one brought against Uruguay, which was trying to do, and eventually did the same thing. So this is when it gets more convoluted and things start to get more complicated, because you're no longer talking necessarily about TRIPS and the TRIPS framework and how it works in a state and state relationship. We have now what we call regime shift. We just moved and changed form to something that's more about investment and a state-investor relationship under these agreements, essentially. And because we have to talk about some other things, keep this in mind, and if you guys have the time, have a look at the case notes that I put on the reading list. Two important cases. One is the one involving Uruguay. What perhaps more interesting when it comes to the investment agreements is the case involving Eli Lilly in Canada, which deals with patent law. They're both quite fascinating, really. But it also tells you that the discussion actually changed quite a bit, because you see different perspectives and the way that they deal with concepts is quite different. It's more about property, it's more about investment, it's more about expectations. And try to see how much potentially a group of commercial law arbitrators can intervene in policy setting from member states. Rochelle Dreyfus' article is also quite good, also a very interesting insight into this, if you guys have the chance. But it is a different kind of discussion, and you see this moving. You see countries as well. The NAFTA revision, Canada is pulling out of the IP section, saying that we're not. This is an investment agreement. We're not going to be subject to any IP-related claims under arbitration for this agreement, for example. So there are impacts already because they had not the best experience with Eli Lilly. Any questions? Some of these things we will actually get back to when we are addressing the different topics, because this is pretty much an overarching seminar to the extent that many of these issues we see being discussed later at the very different national levels when it comes to patents, for example, or even trademarks. One of our seminars is on trademark functions. So what do we expect of trademarks? How do we protect trademarks, and what are brands, and how far should they go? So these are all things that we will still talk about. So now, important thing is to talk about the student presentations. So you guys hopefully, and I know that some of you have already picked a group, or at least beginning to select groups on Moodle. Just very quickly. Hopefully. I put a link here. It's just an easy link. If you go here on student presentations, you're going to be taken to the slide already. And these are essentially the main instructions. And what you have to do, the most important thing to remember, is that you got to pick your list by clicking here. And just to make it easier, because this is week, what, 4 now or something? So if you don't really know everyone so well, you can always pick a group, and other people in the same situation will pick their own group. And then you can use Moodle to talk between yourselves within the group, which is quite helpful. And later I can update this and make a schedule so it will become far easier for all of us. Good news, maybe, is that I didn't get the updated class list from the law school to today, so we are actually fewer. So we're not going to have, and I'm going to update this when I get back to my office. But we're not going to have as many groups. There are going to be 7 and 6. It's going to be more like 11. So easier to manage on the day as well, because you guys may, if you want to, use more minutes to do your presentation. But honestly, it's all here, but the idea is not to go for something terribly long, actually. It's just like a presentation, more like 7 minutes than 10. Think about 10 minutes with, as your limit, if you need those 3 minutes to wrap up something. So groups of 4 and 2 or 3 groups of 3. It's going to be all on Moodle. Once you have a full group, you can email me your topic. And no need for now to write an essay or anything, or submit an essay, nothing like that. It's more about the presentation and how you frame it. So pick a contested IP issue, and you frame it by using 3 slides, PowerPoint slides. It's really supposed to be very brief and objective. It doesn't, if you're really struggling with 3 slides, you can use 5. But no more than 5. It's probably best used to keep it with 3 slides. Just exploring the topic and these kind of questions that we have been doing, and then also the kinds of discussions that you have with Martin. Essentially, what are the policy issues involved in this? What does it mean? Which way you could take? What is the potential impact of this? How is the law being applied? How is it being dealt with? If you are unsure about your first choice being picked, you can always send with your email a second choice. Otherwise, we would like as a group to do this. The only thing that I ask you is that only one person for each group send me an email. You should copy all the others, but please don't send me hundreds of emails. Any questions? Otherwise, you can just email.
Does the topic have to be a question, or just do we have to?
No, it doesn't have to be a question.
Okay.
But you should be asking questions.
Okay.
Let's put it this way. But it can be very different ways, actually. There's a lot of freedom here, but it's just, let me try to think of a few examples here. Something that we will cover. Lower value and other trademark functions. That's one topic, potentially. Or other trademark functions already is one topic. If you pick a judgment, which is fine, just try to see or select what is controversial about that judgment and focus on that, because it's not about making a case comment or an overview of a judgment. It's more about taking something from a judgment and making this an issue. But it's also fun to use something like funk and media.